Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dialogues at the Living Edge. I'm very excited to be here with Veronica Love. I have known Veronica for, gosh, it's got to be over 20 years now. And Veronica is an incredible human being. She is the CEO at the Newfield Network. She is a masterful coach, and I really look forward to having the opportunity to explore together today. So, welcome, Veronica.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here.
Yeah. So, I would love to begin with inviting you to share with us what your sense is of what is coaching.
Mm, you're going to start with the really meaty questions.
Yep.
Yeah, gosh, what is coaching? Well, what arises for me when you ask that is that coaching is perpetually changing and evolving and shifting, and um, I, I wouldn't want to lock it down to be a static one thing, one answer fits all. And with that, I would say that there are certain components and aspects of that I think are really vital to being included in what is coaching. And one of them is that from the ontological tradition, that coaching has so much to do with examining our own perspective and, as we often say, taking a look at how we take a look, noticing how we notice, and observing how we observe. So the coaching, being engaged in a coaching dialogue, is a dialogue that somehow begins to inquire into assumptions, beliefs, underpinnings that we're often blind to, that we often don't see, things that we hold as just the way things are, or a truth that is fundamental to all things. And so a lot of times, I think excellent coaching is when we get underneath to like the building blocks of what begins to create our structures, uh, and how we see things. The other piece I would say that I think is fundamental in excellent coaching is that it isn't just an abstract dialogue, that it's really based on being an embodied human being and summoning the wholeness of who we are, from our somatic wisdom and knowing to our emotional intelligence, to as well as the cognitive, and weaving all of those different wisdom capacities that we humans have and accessing all of them so that we can be present to the fullness of life as it shows up. So those are some of the core components. I'm sure there's many more we could add, but I'll pause there.
Beautiful. So I'm curious, when you're talking about taking a look at how we look, I'm wondering what your sense is of the impact that that has on us as human beings in this current world that we're in.
Yeah, I think the impact can be huge. I mean, I'm remembering right now participants that have gone through our coach training program that came to realize, for example, that they had lived the past 5 years through the lens of resentment, right? And suddenly, when they were able to see that and able to practice shifting that, it altered their whole reality. It altered the way that they related not only to themselves, but the way that they related to their children, to their family, to their teams and organizations. So there can be a really radical shift in how we live life and how we experience life when we're able to tap into those deep places of like wiping the windshield clean in a new way. It just suddenly it looks fresh and completely new, and often there is so many more possibilities that arise that we were unable to see before.
Yeah, what occurs to me as you're speaking is what is the cost of not looking at how we look and imagining, the incredible pain and divisiveness that we all of us witness in this world every day, and how a lot of that pain, comes through seeing through a lens and not realizing that it's a lens, and just living as if the way that I see the world is fundamentally the way things are, which creates a lot of problems when we run into another human being who is doing the same thing but with a different set of lenses. And it occurs to me that that really, it really fosters this kind of collective experience of divisiveness and perpetuation of suffering.
And because often what happens is then we enter into a place of, well, who's right and who's wrong. And
Mhm.
we enter into a place of polarizing. And so when we're able to see that the lens is malleable and that we all have different lenses, there's also a way in which I think it invites us into a more compassionate heart, a more compassionate stance, a more compassionate listening to then facilitate, right, more understanding.
Yeah, because I suppose that if I'm aware that I'm looking through a lens and that could change, then that would also help me realize that other people are looking through a lens, and that we're all here sort of looking through these goggles, and that there's some degree of choice. But what I also hear is that there's some possibility for understanding. That if I'm not completely fixed on that the way that I see the world is the only possibility, well, then that would mean that maybe other people might have a point. There might be something valuable in what various perspectives have to offer.
Yeah. Well, for so long, one of the things that we mention at Newfield is just the term conversation, right? And that conversing means to turn towards. And so the act of being engaged in a conversation with someone is actually the opportunity to turn towards that person, to turn towards a place of mutual or shared understanding, which, if we're looking at one slice of the pie and someone else is looking at a different slice of the pie, and we can actually listen to each other and have that sense that suddenly we get to see two slices, right? So our own reality, our own worldview is expanded when we engage in deep conversation with each other. And I think this is the potency that lies in good conversation or in coaching. Very often, what we don't know, we have a tendency to be scared of, many of us, right? It's freaks us out. Oh my gosh, I don't know that. And so then there's like retraction and recoiling and becoming small or, hiding. Um, and so in that place, rather than actually coming into a place of curiosity or asking questions or learning, um, and so that capacity to encounter something new, I'm thinking actually of someone I was with recently who encountered something new and in that moment said, oh, I've never encountered this before. And I was so inspired in hearing that. And I thought, what would happen if all of us human folks, right, when we encountered something new, we just paused first and declared, like, this is a moment of newness, and then recognize, well, how are we in relationship to that moment, that first encounter, as a way to, one, create awareness of our relationship to it, and then two, have a sense of, right, if I'm going to be in a place of choice, if I'm going to be in a place of design, if I'm going to be in a place of looking at what is the best for all folks involved, then how do I shift the way in which I'm showing up in that moment?
Oh yeah, I love that. For me, the name of this podcast, Dialogues at the Living Edge, it's very much about what you're describing, where there's a recognition that something can happen in conversation. That conversation isn't just talking about words or describing things, but there is a possibility for something generative to occur. and that we have the choice to lean right up to the living edge and peer out and say, I don't know what's going to happen next, because my observer, the way in which I look at the world is malleable, as you say. There's a degree of change that could occur because we're not fixed. And then there's this willingness or ability to turn towards each other, as you were describing, and intentionally engage in the kinds of conversations that transform us, that awaken us, that take us somewhere beyond the horizon.
And for so many of us, we were not educated, we were not trained, we were not groomed, we were not, right, in terms of learning about the power of conversation or recognizing that we actually do have capacity to choose, or there's multiple ways in which we could navigate through this. Which is the way that we would like to, right? How do we collaborate? And so all of these skills and capacities, I think the beautiful thing is that as a human, we can cultivate them. And I think many of us don't really know that that's even an option in the world. Depending what profession and industry and background and all of that we've had. So the fact that we are not broken eternally, that we're not terrible, or bad, or eternally insufficient, that we're not worthless, right? All of these things that actually we can practice learning and growing and cultivating. And that requires, I believe, bringing our own fullness of self into it, but also very often being in a community space of learning, being in a collective shared place where, everyone is actually going through the journey of inner cultivation.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I mean, it's one of the things about, the Newfield network. A lot of times people will use the word Newfield for short, but to me, the network part is so important, because on the one hand, while Newfield is inviting people into a new field of possibility, there's an invitation to see that malleability of perspective, which all of a sudden opens up this whole other range of discovery. The other thing that's happening is it's all about collective learning. It's all about collective discovery. It's all about supporting human beings to discover who they are in an ever deepening way together, because we arise in relationship to each other in a way that we don't arise when we're just sort of doing it ourselves or trying to learn by ourselves.
Exactly. And there's a sense of, right, when we look at, for example, who are we in relation to others? So, who am I becoming as a mother in relationship to my child, as a partner or a spouse in relationship to my sweetheart, right? All of these things, who am I in relationship to my team? Um, all of these elements, when we're consciously in relationship, how we evolve, what we evolve into, all of those things. Um, so the nourishing piece, that cultivation piece, happens in relation, and as well as in relationship to our own selves. But this piece of comes to mind is, what is the quality of conversations I'm engaging in a daily basis? Right? We often, at least in Boulder, we think about food, right? Is it organic? Is it, this or that? And the quality of what I'm eating and what I'm ingesting. But similarly, in terms of, there's also a quality of the conversations I'm having. Is there a space for depth in the conversation? Is there a space for not knowing and being transparent about the fact that we don't know? Is there a space where we know that we're able to articulate things that maybe we've never said before? And so to be in a good quality conversation can be so profoundly nourishing to the depth of who we are. And I think in today's world, there's so much fast paced, so much quick, snippet, and rush to move on to the next thing and check our, to do list. But one of the pieces I think that gets missed is engaging in that good quality conversation, which I think circles back to your opening question around what is coaching. To me, coaching is that good quality conversation where there's a human being that is really present and they're listening to the whole aspect of who you are, truly, deeply listening. Um, and I'm thinking about Carl Rogers has a quote of, and I'm going to paraphrase, I don't remember exactly, but something to the effect of how uh, deep listening is one of the most powerful acts that we can do as human beings. And so on the one hand, there is a sense of learning the power of language, like speech acts and requests and promises and offers, and understanding our way of utilizing those to generate new possibilities, whether that's a business possibility, whether that's a family possibility, or whatever in any domain. But then there's also the other side of the coin, which is how are we being present and actually receiving another human being?
Beautiful. And I'm curious, also circling back to the beginning with the other thing that you spoke about in relationship to this question, what is coaching? You spoke about um, inviting someone out of abstraction into the moment and into an embodied place. And so I'm curious about that and sort of what that means to you and what's the impact of having conversations when that is what we're doing.
So, my experience in working with um, humans in coaching is that when we're able to bring our attention and our awareness to the soma or to body and notice how we're inhabiting our body, how we are gesturing, posturing, moving or not moving our body, it is an anchor point, and a portal into a whole new depth of conversation. Because very often our body is in almost like a default mode. It moves in certain ways that we've been moving for years and years, and yet we're completely blind to. And so when we, happen to move our arm a certain way or a hand a certain way, or tilt our head, or suddenly curl or straighten up, or whatever the shift is in our bodies, that when we bring that to the foreground, it brings people into the present to recognize how they are being in their body. And from there, it opens up uh, often conversations that are missed when we're, especially with, and I've heard this more and more from students in my applied somatics course, who are often working with leaders and thinkers and luminaries and folks that tend to be very smart, right? Like hyper intellectual or really academic, or just people that are quick, right? And with those folks, often they can run in circles around any question, or there's a capacity to skip over something. But yet, when there's an invitation to actually consciously connect with their body, it suddenly breaks them out of their usual mode and invites them into something completely new. And so, more and more, what I'm finding is that, and especially from as I said, the students that were mentioning this, that it becomes this anchor point to a whole new conversation of depth and possibility.
Hmm. Well, I'd love to hear along those lines a little bit more about, because I know at Newfield, like when we're looking at, well, what constitutes the observer? This looking at how we look. It's not just a cognitive or even a developmental perspective sort of that's floating around somewhere, but it also includes our emotional intelligence, our emotional territory, and it includes the body. And so I'm curious if you could share more about what does that mean to understand to explore the body as part of our knowing lens.
Yeah. So what shows up for me, and I mentioned it a little bit before, around our body has default ways of moving and of being. Our internal narratives, our cultural discourses, all of that is um, comes into shaping our bodies, comes into shaping the way we literally stand or sit or move in the world. When we see someone, for example, speaking in Italy, and how an Italian person would move their hands or intonations, right? Versus, for example, someone from Japan or someone from Argentina or wherever it is. So there are cultural influences um, that impact how we move. There's also, for example, gender influences, right? If we're moving in a way that is supposed to be quote unquote what we maybe traditionally think of as feminine or masculine, um, according to our age, right? How does a 2-year-old move versus how does a 70-year-old move? And again, it's not one thing, but there are patterns, there are tendencies that we can attune to. So when we look at the observer, we're looking at, yes, there is the cultural aspect of how we observe life, but that lens is not purely cognitive. There is the cultural piece, as I mentioned, but there's also that it is actually in our bones, in our muscles, in our skin. And so when we intentionally shapeshift, when we intentionally alter our bodies, suddenly we enter into a new internal dialogue. Suddenly, perhaps an emotion arises. Suddenly, a mood shifts. And so, accessing changes when we're looking at transformation and we're looking at intentionally becoming a certain way, we can really use the body and move it in different ways. And we can do that in a pretty overt way, like I'm literally opening my arms and have it be explicit and outright. We can be much more subtle about it, where we actually bring our awareness to micro gestures or tiny shifts in tension or contraction. And so as a coach, when we understand those possibilities, we can work with our clients in various ways that really begin to illuminate patterns that run very deep in our being.
Mm. Yeah, it reminds me of how we can look at often in at least in the West, we often think about, the mind is in the head. But another way to look at it is that the mind is wholly distributed, that it's not actually in a location in the head, but that it actually is located everywhere. And secondly, that the mind and the body or the psyche and the soma are completely married together. It reminds me of a distinction in Chinese medicine. One way to talk about something on the inside and something on the outside is to talk about sort of the inside and the outside of one cloth. So rather than the inside or the outside of a fence, it's the inside and the outside of one cloth, that the whole thing is one blooming. And so as you're speaking, I'm hearing you really talk about this distributed mind and the whole body as one event of knowing.
That's right, absolutely. There is an intelligence that's dispersed throughout our whole being. And very often many of us tend to have that separation, right? Like we don't connect with our below the neck. And so when we suddenly bring our attention there, there's all these things that we discover, like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that. And so as we bring our awareness and increase our somatic awareness, that enables us to know ourselves more. It's this huge discovery that we can access anytime. But for many of us, it's this huge mystery. Like, oh my gosh, the body, I'm scared of it. I don't like it. I am uncomfortable. And because we don't grow up knowing, many of us at least don't grow up actually connecting to our bodies in this kind of a way. Um, and so as we connect to it more, as we inquire in a really supportive, caring way, and begin to learn from our own bodies, it's so incredible what we discover. And I find that there is so much beauty and there's so many treasures. And to have the opportunity to really tap into those places, um, just, yeah, it's quite amazing.
Yeah. Well, so then what I wonder is, to build on the first question, what is coaching? I'd love to get your sense of what is somatic coaching? Because as I, as I interact with many coaches, one of the most common things that I hear when the conversation of body and somatics comes up is, oh, I know that somatics is really important, but when I'm in a coaching session, I don't really know how to do anything about it. And so I wonder if you could share, well, first of all, like what is somatic coaching? And then maybe we could explore a little bit so we can get a taste of, well, how would I do that? How would I actually like bring this to into the ground, and support a client through that avenue?
Well, somatic coaching for me is, on the one hand, just so completely part of ontological coaching because for over 34 years, the ontological work has integrated the somatic component into the coaching. But when we say somatic coaching, we're foregrounding the body, which is the arena that's often been dismissed, neglected, right? The body is gross, it's inferior. We have all these things that being smart is really about thinking things, not necessarily sensing things. So the somatic coaching really brings foregrounds the body as a way in to ask questions, to be attuned to connect with. And in doing that, as I mentioned before, so many of our blind spots are revealed because they are so unconscious. When I'm speaking, I right now, for example, I'm not paying until I said this, I wasn't paying attention to the quality and the intonation of my voice. I wasn't really consciously saying, oh, is my chin going to go up or down? Are my shoulders forward or back? They simply are, right? It's just the way it is for me. So as soon as we bring our attention to these aspects of body, we begin to then inquire and connect to, well, when I am in relationship to this place with a new awareness, what qualities of my being do I connect with? So perhaps there is a sadness there. Perhaps there is an enthusiasm there. Perhaps there's an old story. Our bodies are an archive of time. They are where all of our experiences, right, are here in our bodies. We can access what it was like so long ago, or just a moment ago, or now, in the now, in this moment. And that capacity, having that much lived experience where we can is a huge resource for us. And yet, as you said, many people, I don't know what to do with it. Where do I go with it? How do I inquire? And that there's very simple ways that we can access a very profound depth in terms of transformative conversations with people through the body. One piece is to learn to observe the body as if we turn up the volume in terms of noticing what is happening with the body, what is not happening with the body. And as I'm in conversation in real time as a coach, have I cultivated that capacity to observe the body in detail, in subtlety, with refinement, with nuance? So that piece is something that I think is a huge skill because it's from the real-time experience that our questions arise, that the wonderments arise, that the challenges arise, right? That all of those things that we do as a coach come forward. So that one piece of somatic awareness and somatic observation is tremendously relevant.
Hmm. So what I'm hearing, I mean, you've just said so many amazing things, but I'll start here. One of the things I'm hearing is that if I'm with my client, or if I'm not a coach and I'm with my friend or my neighbor, um, one way to deepen the conversation would be to sort of turn up the volume on noticing how this person I'm interacting with, how they're moving in their body. And then I might ask a question directly about what their experience is. And what occurs to me is that this is one of those ways to bring someone out of the abstract. Oh, I noticed when you just responded to me that your voice went up and your sort of chest kind of curled. And I'm wondering, what are you noticing right now?
Exactly. And so that question often creates a break or a pause, a shift of, oh, right, I didn't notice that. All right, I wasn't aware of that. So often the response initially is, oh, I had no idea.
Hmm.
But from that, I had no idea, or that lack of awareness, or that lack of noticing, once a person does begin to notice, then we're dropping into the presence, we're into the moment, and we're beginning to drop underneath what is often superficial conversation. So it drops the cadence, and it drops the it anchors us into something deeper that we can explore with a person.
Yeah, it occurs to me that, if we're looking at the mind as something that's distributed throughout the whole body, and we have this curiosity about looking at how we look, taking a look at how we're making meaning. If we're only operating from the neck up, then there's this whole way in which that aspects of our distributed mind are completely invisible. And what I hear you pointing to is, in one way, there's a simplicity to it, but there's also a deep profundity in it, that you're literally inviting someone to look at another dimension of their mind by going below the neck and getting curious in the moment.
Exactly. It's very akin to the metaphor of like the iceberg or whatever. Like there's a little peak that's above the surface, and we could say that little peak could be the head. And then below the water line, there's all of these things that are in the dark or in the water, submersed, and we're semi-conscious, unconscious about, or whatever it is. And so as we're kind of these explorers that dive down into that depth, and then we bring up a treasure and we say, hey, did you take a look at this? What is this about? And so there's this vast territory. It's huge. It's a very simple practice. And what I find is that there are elements that need to be in place in order for it to really be, um, oh, the word that comes to mind for some reason is graceful. Like in order for it to be really held, because we are asking, right, to people to go on an adventure, right? We don't know what's going to happen. They don't know, we don't know. We're in this moment of being on that edge that you spoke about earlier. And with that, then there's certain um, ways of embracing and holding and being with the conversation that can support that adventure to go smoothly, that can support the person. So when they go on the adventure, there's a real sense of agency and empowerment and discovery, where that person is really able to powerfully experience a new aspect of who they are and relate to themselves in a new way.
And so I'm curious, could you give an example of what you mean there so we can kind of get a feel for it, or maybe even try it?
Sure. Well, part of what we, talk about so much in coaching these days is around creating and generating safety and a sense of a relation with the person, so that there isn't a distancing, like I'm over here and the client is over there, but rather that together we're co-creating where we're headed and where we go and where we travel to in our conversation. So we
Mm.
talked about the quality of the conversation. So part of what I believe creates a high quality conversation is when every person in the dialogue that is in contact with their own agency and with their own power, and to see what that brings to um, what emerges from that place.
Yeah, it occurs to me when I reflect on what you're saying that, one of the ways that I do this as a coach is as I go into a place in my body where I feel safe. And this is this again, this way in which that the body can be a portal to all these different territories. One being when I access a quality of safety or a quality of love inside my body, it it creates an unspoken invitation or a resonance
Oh,
in this new field that's being created by coach and coaching client or by two neighbors, however we're orienting. But through that quality of embodiment, I can intentionally bring in a quality of stillness or safety or care or nurturing,
yeah,
and it through the body. Yeah.
there's a nonverbal invitation, right? And so that's part of the practice, is that when we're speaking about somatic coaching, we're not only paying attention to the client's body, we're also paying attention to our own body,
Mm.
and we're noticing the relationship, right? So, um, absolutely, we bring in nonverbal cues, we bring in nonverbal invitations, and there's a way in which that is deeply sensed by humans, because we've had, right, beyond language, we've had this awareness about, are we safe in this moment? Are we relating in this moment? Is there a place where I can drop into something that is uncomfortable or uncertain, or I need to explore? And so that all of those pieces come together in an embodied dialogue where I'm aware of, oh, suddenly my stomach is really tight, right? But then what do I do with that knowing? If I'm aware of my stomach and its tightness, then how do I use that in the coaching conversation? And those are, I think, all of the somatic competencies that coaches begin to develop, right? So there's the awareness, there's the observation, and then there's the part about somatic inquiry. What are the different kinds of questions that I can actually bring and utilize with my client? And if I'm holding a sense of safety, if I'm embodying safety, if I'm in resonance with my client, what how does that actually alter the conversation? Because the conversation is not just altered by what I articulate or verbalize. It's also altered by how I'm showing up in that moment. Right? Am I being really pushy? Am I being really assertive? Am I leaning forward? Right? Or am I clipped? Is the way I'm speaking clipped and fast paced? And what does that do? How does that then impact my client? Or if I'm actually leaning back and spacious, right? There's a million options. But am I attuned and am I awake to how I'm moving and being present to my client?
Mm. I love it. Well, there's one more thing I wanted to circle back to because you said that the body is an archive of time. And I just thought that was so beautifully said. And, one of the things that it brings up for me is this distinction between the past and living history. And that the past is the stuff that happened, and you can't go back and change the stuff that happened. But then we all have living history. That we can't work on the past unless we have a time machine. But there's this living history where everything that we've experienced, including what our families have experienced, our lineage has experienced, the whole entire cosmos has experienced, there's a way in which that is living inside of us. And as you put it, it's here right now. And and I thought that was really fascinating from the perspective of somatic coaching, that what I think I hear you saying is that through the body, it's a portal through which we can make contact with that living history in a non-abstract way, right here, right now. And so I'm curious, um, what else you'd want to share about that, because it's such a rich thing.
Well, I think part of what I would want to say is that there is, with all of that, in with all of those aspects in our being, there is so much goodness that we can summon and bring to the forefront in our own bones and in our hearts and in our circulatory system and in our skeletal system, right? All of that, like, there is so much, there's so many incredible aspects to being embodied, and that we can connect to that vastness and that mystery and that hugeness of being part of this universe. And so as we connect with that, I think we connect with our inherent strength and our inherent resilience and our inherent capacity and all the things that we have lived through in life, um, that really, what's the word I want to use here, that we bring that fullness into this moment in time. We can bring all of that into this moment in time, which is incredible capacity. And I think very often we, because we live in this kind of separate from our body, there's always this distance. You know, so many people I speak with, there's this distance between themselves and their body somehow. And as that begins to come together with awareness and intention and goodness, then it awakens that capacity to really tap into that full spectrum.
Mm, beautiful. Yeah, it just sounds like, to me, I hear a powerful invitation into allowing the body to be a portal into this. I guess I'll say it like this: for me, the pain in my life has often been the most powerful doorways into wholeness. And a lot of that pain exists from the neck down, right? A lot of that, it lives in my heart, it lives in my blood, it lives inside of my body. And what I'm hearing is that somatic coaching, or a foregrounding of the soma as a something that is important, that's deemed as a necessary territory of exploration. It allows us to touch into the way that history is arising in us, so that we can do something about it, so that we can love those places in ourselves, so that we can be curious in a state of wonder. And to me, that opens up so much possibility.
Yeah. And said another way, when we're able to see our embodied habits and patterns and tendencies, when those are illuminated, we can then move into new ways of standing in the world, new ways of moving through the world, new ways of dancing and being and expressing. And that is not something that I'm just, thinking about doing in some future moment, but rather to invite myself, my client, whoever, to actually break habits, to actually break ways of being, and enter into it's this contact with a new form of freedom and a new form of um, expression that brings an aliveness to any given moment, right? If I've, it's just, if you think about imagining your hand making a fist, and if you had to hold that fist tightly for the entire day, and then at the end of the day, you could actually outstretch your fingers and open to reveal your palm of your hand, right? There is a visceral experience in that shift. And so with our bodies, when we bring our attention to the sensation and the experience and, right, the wholeness, it's so rich in that. And so similarly, not just our hand, but our whole body, is accustomed to being in certain movements and postures. And so as we break out of those, as we shift out of those, as we gently sway into different possibilities there, it's amazing to see how that part of the body is directly linked with new language, new stories,
Mm.
new ways in which we can speak, but also new emotional patterns. So all of that is completely linked and intertwined, as we were mentioning in the beginning. So a shift in the hand from fist to open, or a shift in the shoulders, or a slight change or variation in our movement, then ripples through the whole aspect of who we are, our whole coherency. So when we're talking about shifting something in the body, it's not that that is separate and other, but rather that the entire coherency of who we are has the opportunity to breathe a new breath.
Oh, it's beautiful. And I guess we could continue that further and to say that when any one of us does that, because we are wholly interconnected with each other, everything that you just described, not only is it something that we're like not just doing in the body, but that it's connected with all of the rest of us, it's literally connected to all the rest of us. That when we make these changes and have these explorations that you're describing, it changes the way we're in relationship to each other. And it changes how, who we are, how we are. And even if it's this subtle shift that's occurring inside of our body, because those changes are so far reaching in terms of changing how we think, how we feel, our relationship to our own goodness, that immediately starts to have an impact on all of the other people that we're in relationship with, the body of the world.
Yes. And it alters how the world shows up for us.
Mm.
So not only is my body shifting, and not only am I in relation to others in a new way, but reality, right? The world around me suddenly looks different, is experienced differently. Um, and and that aspect is so beautiful, because suddenly I'm different, the world is different, my relationships are different. So our bodies, we have skin, we have pores, we have a way in which we make contact with the quote unquote outside world. So when our internal body shifts, also our external surrounding and that relationship is also altered. And that is huge. I mean, if you just think for a moment, and if you just sense for a moment, right, how many people in today's world are anxious? I mean, anxiety is so predominant. And to be in an anxious body, to experience an anxious world, when we're able to bring peacefulness into our body, into our being, how does that then, again, this is a very simple question, and yet I think it's so important to ask. If I'm in a peaceful place, how am I relating to my surroundings? How am I relating to everything, not just humans, but to the whole world, to the sky, to the trees, to the land, to the animals, to the environment, to right on and on and on. And so the human and the non-human, the inanimate and the animate, all of that, all of those relationships, all those points of contact, that interbeing is radically different.
Mm. This has been such a beautiful conversation so far. And I feel like I'm learning a lot and I'm discovering a lot. And I love hearing your perspective on this. And you mentioned, as we start moving towards a completion point, you mentioned the applied somatics course that you had taught in the past, and I know that you're offering another one. I'd love to hear just a little bit about what this course is about, when it is.
Sure. So it begins in November, the beginning of November this year, 2024. And it's a gorgeous course. I was actually taken aback at the exquisiteness of this course. We just completed a round and of the inaugural course, and now we're launching a second one. And the course is really focused on truly heightening and developing our somatic awareness. So, as I mentioned before, that sense of kind of turning up the volume or illuminating the subtleties of the soma and observing that. So, awareness and observation, but we look at all the somatic competencies around, as I mentioned before, somatic inquiry. And then we also look at the somatic principles, which are these beautiful aspects that are very simple, that we look at applying the somatic principles. And one of them, actually, it's funny that the conversation went where it went, is that, everything is related, everything is connected. So if I'm noticing a shift in your glance and where you're looking, and if I actually dive into that shift and we explore that together, that is intimately connected with your breakdowns, with your dreams, with your challenges, with your vision, all of it. And so as we enter into any subtle somatic aspect, we can arrive into these huge, deep places. So we look at the principles. And the course was actually really designed for people that are already coaches and people who are already in practice or have a busy schedule. And it's all about really practicing. So the first week of the month, we do immersive, collective, experiential learning. And then afterwards, we get to actually observe coaching actually watch coach myself and a client, and we look at how these distinctions, these models, these ideas are actually occur in a coaching dialogue. And then after, there's the following week, there's the opportunity to actually practice with peer coaching. So it's a lot of practice, practice, practice. And the whole design and format is very dynamic and very engaging, so that it is an embodied learning, that it lands in your bones as far as actually doing somatic coaching. And that's why it's called applied somatics, because it really is about the application of understanding theory, but also really the other side of that coin. How is this practical? How does it actually work in real time with real clients?
Fantastic. That sounds lovely. We'll go ahead and put a link to if people want to learn more. I'll put a link in the notes. Um, well, this has been so fun and so incredible. You're fantastic. I would, yeah, I wonder if there's any closing things that you'd like to say as we bring this to a pause.
Oh, I just want to say thank you. It's been lovely having a conversation. And yeah, I'm very open if anyone wants to reach out and learn about the somatics program or our coach training program or all of that. Look forward to engaging with all of you.
All
Thank you.
right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Veronica. Hello, everyone. Alexander Love here at Dialogues at the Living Edge. I just had such a fantastic conversation with Veronica Love. She's the CEO of the Newfield Network, and she is a master coach. She is fantastic. And we began by taking a deep dive into the exploration of what is coaching, but then we went even further into what is somatic coaching and what does that have to do with being human? What is somatic coaching, and what kind of impact does this kind of exploration have on us as coaches, as neighbors, as leaders, as friends, as human beings in this world that want to make this world a better place? So this was really a cool conversation. I really enjoyed it. So I think you're going to enjoy it too. All right. See ya.